Victory is not an absolute. A warrior can triumph in battle and be lessened by it, for it is the end that sanctifies war, not the means. The warrior that fights for nothing more than blood has already been defeated.
Vheren Ashuraddon, the first Reaver. Now, there's not really that much information out in there. I don't know a tremendous amount about this guy. I think he's one of the characters who came about at the relaunch of Heresy 2.0. But from the little that we do know, he's very closely associated with Horus, modeling his style and tactical outlook on the very front-forward, aggressive, striking maneuvers of Horus. In fact, in the Wikipedia entry, he is described as being the first Reaver, where he experimented with Reaver attack squads and the implementation of it Legion-wide. As the Horus Heresy went on, Ashuraddon became a little bit more disillusioned with Horus and the influence that Chaos is playing within the Legion. He's very much Chthoniya first, let's make Chthoniya great again. And later led an attack battalion of about 20,000 Marines with allied Auxilia and Dark Mechanicum to retake the homeworld, Chthoniya. Badly injured during that conflict around the time where Horus was undertaking the Siege of Terra. What happened to him after the Siege of Chthoniya, we don't know. But that's the setup for Vheren. Aggressive, front-forward, aggressive Space Marine, the first Reaver. How can we bring these traits into the miniature painting? How can we display these? Well, let's have a look at the step-by-step. The very first thing we want to do is cover the entire miniature after we prime it black. It's very important we prime it black with hairspray. 2 thin, even coats should do the trick. We use petroleum grey, then through the airbrush from a zenithal highlighting position to highlight all the black areas. I only chose to do his shoulder pads in black as I wanted the majority of the miniature to be in the sea green. We thinned the paint roughly 1 portion paint to 1 portion thinner. Incubi Darkness, oh my old friend. This is thinned down to a ratio of roughly 1 portion paint to 2 portions thinner. It is slightly thinner than the scale 75 because Games Workshop paints are naturally thicker. And this covers over all the black areas of the miniature. All the areas that you want in the sea green. The miniature is black at the moment. Then we come in with Lupercal green. It feels only right that we use Lupercal green and Sons of Horus green in our Sons of Horus video tutorials. So Lupercal green is thinned down roughly to a ratio of 1 portion paint to 2 portions thinner, and then 2 even coats is put on in a zenithal highlighting pattern. So this is lighting directly from above on the chest and on the legs. Those are the principal areas that you want to hit to develop the structure of your piece. And please pay attention to how I use the airbrush. It isn't in one long continuous motion. No, I'm making these little flicky motions to build up the green. I'll go 2 full even layers. I only want to leave Incubi Darkness in the darkest recesses of the piece. Next up, we take Cyberite green and Sons of Horus green. Why am I using this in combination? I find that the Sons of Horus green on its own, it's slightly too cold. I need a little bit more saturation and to give it more that verdigris bluish hint. So that's why the Cyberite green is also brought in at this stage. We are mixing it together roughly 50-50. And then this is airbrushed on all the top layers of the armor, especially the chest, the legs, any areas or volumes of the piece that we want to bring to the fore and we would really like to express. This is where we're at it, along the legs, top of the chest, and the helmet if you chose to go with that helmeted head version. The bottom of the legs are a really nice place to put it, the knee pads and the thighs. This model is a really big chunky piece of resin, so you're able to give some really nice modulation. And that's what we're aiming for here. It's not only the expression of light on the miniature. We want to express the shapes of the miniature as well, and that's what the airbrush stage does so well. Very low effort way to produce believable shapes. In effect, we're using a two-dimensional technique on a 3D model. How cool is that? So I am using the Iwata CMC. This is a 0.2 nozzle. You don't need anything this fine. I've been using a Galeri very recently, a 0.2 nozzle, and that would more than do the work. So if you're new to airbrushing, if you're new to this, don't feel like you need to run out and buy a £500 airbrush. No, you get very, very good results. Okay, next up. We are using USMC Tank Crew Light. It's very important that you get the highlight version of this. I wasn't aware that you have a USMC Tank Crew, just normal color. It's very dark. No, you need the light version of this. And this goes at the very top of our values. This is thinned down one portion paint to one portion thinner. 2 layers are added into the very top highlight. Now, the reason why we use the hairspray at the outset of the job is that we can reactivate the paint job. We cover the paint with water and then we chip it. We come in with a hard bristled brush and then we chip gleefully away to create realistic paint chips in the piece. There's nothing quite like this technique for giving realistic texture to your miniature. But unfortunately, unless you're experienced using it and you know the material, you can chip away large portions of the paint, which is what you do not want. So try on the test piece first. Try it on the legs first. I know when I'm running this across that it's quite hard to get off, so I can really jam the brush in there, can really... Oh, and this brush, by the way, is the brush from the cleaning kit of the airbrush. You can also use a knife. Indeed, any hard edge surface to create realistic scratches in your miniature would be ideal to use, but the key, practice first. Okay, onto the metallics and blocking other stuff in. Aged copper and decayed metal. Now, I don't have an exact breakdown of how much to how much. Instead, rely on your eye. 50-50 is a good way to go. Decayed metal has great coverage. And I really like the richness of the purple in the aged copper, so that's why I'm using the combination. And because all metal, well, it's not the same. This is battered armor, right? It's not going to be consistent all the way through. Burnt iron is placed on all the metallic places. Knife, gun, chain, what have you. Now we're onto the skin. Okay, for this, I'm using dark skin to light skin. African shadow, pink flesh, basic flesh, golden skin, pale skin. It's a very easy color recipe to translate across a range of Caucasian skin tones. I first place these on my palette, then I analyze the shapes of the face. In all the darker areas, I add scale 75's African shadow into the underside of the cheek, nose, eyebrows, and I outline those. And that's all I do. I don't cover the entire skin, although you can do at this point. I block out the outline of the shadows. Now onto the mid-tone. Pink flesh. From scale 75, mix this bad boy together with my African shadow, and this overlays my mid-tone. Now when we do this at first, you're not going to get a tremendous amount of coverage. Unfortunately, scale 75 paints, they are very limited, very, very limited when it comes to base coating miniatures. They have a gel-like medium, perfect for glazing. Later on in the process, the scale 75 paints will make this so much easier, but for now we have to suffer a little bit. A word on the brush strokes. You'll notice most of the detailing work I'm doing is with the tip of the brush. This is to give the texture to the skin. Space Marines, they live very hard lives, right? They aren't pampered, they aren't moisturized, so we can suggest the hardy, broken nature of the skin through the movement of our brush. We can sweep across the top of the head, because that's where generally the most amount of light will hit. But then when it comes to the cheeks and the lower jaw, we can change it to the tip of the brush and we can punch it at the miniature. For now, more than anything, I'm more interested in getting that base coat down. But later on in the video, you will notice a change in my brush stroke. And it's very important to tell your own stories and paint your own miniatures, changing the style of brush stroke. All in all, it took me around 3 base coats to build this up. Again, very frustrating experience, but you just got to stick with it. Scale 75, they do have their limitations, but my God, once it comes to the later stages, it makes it so worth it. Okay, we have golden skin and pale skin, and we're working up the value scale. So we mix these two together around 50-50, and we apply dots to the top of the head. Now you'll notice a significant change where I was sweeping the brush back and forth. Now it's the tip of the brush to give me very hard line definition on the tips of the highlight. Up until this point, you can also use thinner. So to thin my paint, I do use a little bit of airbrush thinner. Any kind of acrylic thinner would be absolutely perfect. Just helps maintain the intensity of the paint while keeping the correct dilution. Up until this point, I've been using somewhat of a glaze-like consistency to build up my base tones. So we're looking 3 portions paint to 1 portion thinner. May seem thick, but scale 75, they have that gel-like medium. Here, it's much thicker. It's nearly 1-to-1 I'm using. And we run up over, and you should be able to see on the palette how I'm developing that value scale from dark to light. And that way, once I've applied my structure, I can run back down my value scale, I can run back up it, correct mistakes, do all sorts with it. But right now, let's concentrate on building the structure of the face. I really concentrate, I really hone in on the top of the head, top of the cheek, top of the nose, top of the chin. Those are my hot spots. Those are the areas which I can frame the rest of the features of the face is not quite the right phrase, but the expression of the piece. Now, as miniature artists, we are a little bit limited with what we can do. If a guy looks angry, well, we'll paint an angry miniature. But it's up to you whether you want to express these frown lines a bit more aggressively. You can choose to accentuate crow's feet around the eyes, for example, the snarl around the nose. Those lines will give a greater emphasis to the emotion of the piece, and it'll also make them look a little bit older. With this piece, I have painted him as if he's in his late 30s, early 40s, so the skin isn't overly old, so I haven't accentuated the crow's feet, but what I have done is trying to give the almost like the pores, the broken pores and beaten up nature of the skin by dotting those highlights in them, punching them onto the miniature. Okay, I'm running down the value scale. I'm going back to my pink skin tone, and I've thinned it right the way down. You'll notice the change in brush stroke. I'm sweeping it across the miniature again to develop the mid-tone, redevelop the mid-tone. This covers all the way from the shadow over the mid-tone, right the way to the highlight. And as I brush the brush over the top, I can also sweep paint away from it. Okay, so what exactly am I doing here? What do I mean by that? I'm moving pigment into the mid-tone, sweeping it over the top of the highlight, and then sweeping it back down. This way, I'm able to create gentle blends across the surface of the face and reinvigorate that mid-tone. The paint has been thinned down 1 portion paint to around 2 portions thinner. Okay, pale skin, and you can see the value scale we have here running from, I hope you like the graphic as well, running from lightest to darkest. So I'm going to run up my value scale again, thin the paint down ever so slightly, 1 portion paint to 1 portion thinner, or maybe 2 portions paint to 1 portion thinner at this point. I'm using a Rosemary & Co. Kolinsky Sable brush, series 33, which helps no end when it comes to the Sauve work, because a good Kolinsky Sable hairbrush will retain good moisture. And I'll reapply those top highlights. So I haven't peaked my highlights just yet, rather I'm working on the upper mid-tones. All dots, all tense movements with the tip of the brush to give me a very tense looking marine. None of these guys are relaxed. Okay, I'm running up the value scale again, near enough to pure pale skin at this point. And don't feel like you need to run out and buy these paints. I find they convenient to use because they have a good range of colors. They're out of the box, great to use for Caucasian skin. I don't have to mix and match at all. If that's not your thing, great. You can use this as a color recipe and just mass produce them. But you can use Vallejo, you can use MIG, you can use whatever brand manufacturer that you like. Scale 75, they're not the be-all and end-all of skin tones. I chose this because it's a really convenient thing to use. Okay, now we come to the filter layer. So I normally do this with Rhinox hide, but I've been really loving Guilliman flesh recently. I've thinned this, I put it on the surface of the miniature, then I load up moisture into my brush and drag the pigment away. Essentially what I'm trying to do is just help the paint to sit in the folds of the face. Contrast paint will naturally contour to the miniature, but I'm able to push it just a little bit more with the tip of my brush and ensure that I don't have any tide marks. So the process is whack the contrast down on, remove paint from the bristles of your brush, add a little bit of thinner, maybe a little bit of water, drag it off those top highlights. And if you're cheeky enough and you're fast enough, you could even introduce a little bit of pale skin, you could introduce a little bit of basic flesh, and just play with the tones that are already there. But ultimately, a layer of Guilliman flesh will help bind this paint job together a little bit more, a little bit stronger, before then we can go back into detailing it. Run back to my wet palette, look at my value scale, I decide, okay, my mid-tone needs a bit more reinvigorating, my highlights, etc., etc. That is the advantage of using a palette. Doesn't need to be a wet palette, it certainly helps keep paint wetter for longer, which is never a bad thing. But it also creates these kinds of value scales that we can then go on and exploit. Once we have that value scale in place, hell, it even feels like painting by numbers. You find the folds of the face, you find the shadows, you put shadow to shadow, mid-tone to mid-tone, highlight to highlight. And the more you do this, the longer into the process you get, the more developed the piece will become. I finished this off by adding pale skin. I may have mixed it with a pinch of white to add to the teeth and the eyes. Never use pure white, you'll make them look crazy. And I didn't manage to dot the eyes on camera because I kept doing it and my head got in the way. Metallics, 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 metallics. Okay, we have the MIG Ammo dry brush range. And for this, I'm using the darkest silver that they have in their range, which is the gunmetal dry brush paint. And then conveniently later, I'll be using aluminium. So all the areas that need to be dry brushed, I simply whack a little bit of the dry brush over the top. And I also do this for all the silver areas, making sure that I capture the very, very top aspects of it. And then once that's been put down, aluminium is then dry brushed over the metallic areas as well. Nice and simple, nice and easy. I also do this for all the gold areas, or the areas that will become gold. Why am I doing this? Well, you can treat metallic objects in the same way you treat any other object. You can add a pre-shade to it. You can add a lighter surface underneath that when you apply a color on top, it'll make it look brighter. So later on in this process, we will be thinning down gold paint and metallic paint to apply over the top. In fact, right now, Necro Gold and Peridot Alchemy. So Necro Gold comes up first. Pop it on the palette. Riveting stuff, I'm sure you'll agree. This is why you sign up to the Patreon, to watch hardcore and bottling. Okay, Necro Gold is thinned down with a little bit of acrylic thinner to a glaze-like consistency. Now this will take a little bit of time getting your head around. Creating a glaze of the paint, fine, people manage that no problem. Students really seem to struggle with this concept for whatever reason. But just treat the metallic pigmented paint the same way you would any other kind of paint. Thin it down, pass it over the top, and you'll end up with an amazing, amazing, very low effort, amazing looking gold. And this covers from the lower mid-tone to the highlight, and you'll notice I'm sweeping the brush from my shadows into the light. The brush strokes are always consistent like that, from shadow into light, from shadow into light. We want it to sit over the top of that silver that we've put on there. And you know what, a great after effect, I didn't mean to do this, I wish I did. Oh, notice my brush stroke, see it's leading up, up, up. I'm dragging it from shadow to light, from shadow to light. Yeah, one of the unexpected consequences of the silver was actually it gave us sort of like a fuzzy look to the metallic, which was great for the weathering process later on. Next up, Peridot Alchemy. It's getting thinned down, not as much, but a little bit. 3 portions paint to 1 portion thinner, again dragged up towards those highlights. And you'll notice at the end of the brush drag is where the most amount of pigment of paint is deposited. Mwah. Perfect. So drag this over the highlighted areas, drag it up, and you'll notice the great thing with metallic paint is that gorgeous, gorgeous shine that we get. But we really want to solidify it, so we take a little bit of ice yellow, mix this in with our Peridot Alchemy, and just at the very tippy top of our highlights, well, we add dots. We have pretty much a matte in the shadow. Midtones, metallics, and then to solidify it, to really focus the viewer's eye on those top highlights, we add a little bit of a matte paint right at the very, very top of that. So not only are we playing with sparkly paints, we are playing with matte and satin sheens. And this really does help inform the viewer where they should be looking. You know, metallic pigments, they do have a bad reputation for unfocusing the eye and not focusing attention on certain areas. Well, you can play tricks with the viewer by doing this. By thinning your paint, applying it in appropriate areas, and then solidifying your gains with a little bit of matte paint at the end. Does that make any sense? I'm not sure. I think I felt like I was talking like some kind of like personal trainer then, solidifying your gains. Eat protein, bro. This guy ate a lot of protein. Do you know what has really high protein content? Dog food. There's a joke in there about the lunar wolves, I'm not sure. Anywho, carefully block in these smaller details. I've just used Peridot Alchemy because they're so small, they wouldn't benefit from the transition from light to shadow. All of the filigree, especially the banner, I've applied African shadow to the base, and then I've used white. Any white will do. I think I've used the Ammo, the MIG Ammo, the new paint, their range for the white here, because it was on my palette at the time. Oh God, what are they called? Atom, the Atom paint. But really, any white, any of your favorite whites will do. Chimera does an excellent white, scale 75 artist range. Vallejo, well, you know, everyone has a white in their collection. Mark out the top highlights in white. We're doing a very, very, very simple non-metallic metal style banner. I'll mark out the reflections. This is all layer consistency of paint. I consider my light source and build up from there. Please feel free to use my own piece to imitate it. That's what it's there for. Japanese uniform is then thinned down to a glaze consistency, a very heavy glaze consistency. 1 portion paint, 2 portions thinner. And the paint work, again, the paintbrush is moved from the shadow into the light. That's the movement, that's the trick, that's the discipline you need to develop in your brushwork. So we move it into those highlights, over the highlights from the shadows. And this produces pretty much right off the bat like a very satisfying non-metallic metal. Very quick, very simple, very easy. Now it looks so effective because the surface is quite small. If I were to transpose this to a night or a larger piece, it wouldn't work as much. But on smaller, denser filigree like this recipe is perfect. because we simply don't have to worry about the complexity of our light reflections that much. Ice yellow is mixed in with the Japanese uniform, like so. You tell me what distribution that is, maybe 1:1, more on the ice yellow side of things. Again, this is used to highlight those very hard edges, right to those tippy top highlights. Moving my brush stroke from the mid-tone into the highlight. Again, I'm sweeping the brush to where I want the most amount of pigment to sit. Now we are currently doing a PDF series on non-metallic metal. The first one is out right now. It's released around Christmas 2023. And a follow-up is in the works. And this will form part of that. Simple non-metallic metals. So if you did want a greater understanding of where light placement should go, please check out that PDF. I very much doubt that this type of color recipe would work on a larger piece because you simply have more surfaces to worry about and more surfaces to deal with. But on this kind of small surface, it is ideal. Getting a bit of a sore throat. Just like Vheren, from shouting at all those dudes doing the heresy. The laurels on top of the eye were very hard to pick out because the detail's very soft on them. So pay attention and really build those up yourself. Okay, to finish, give somewhat complexity to the light reflections. I used a little bit of magenta that I had on my palette, purple shadow from Nocturna, purple, sunset purple from Scale 75, magenta from the Chimera range. Would be ideal for this. Really thin down, 1 portion paint around 3 portions to 4 portions thinner. Again, I am using thinner for this, and it is gently dragged into the shadowed areas. On a larger piece, you could bring in oranges, you can bring in more cold golds, you could bring in more ambient tones, you can bring in secondary bounce reflections. But here, I'm just trying to sell the illusion of non-metallic. And I guess that's ultimately what non-metallic is. It's selling the illusion of high sheen. No non-metallic will ever give the same kind of look as a true metallic surface. I'm not talking about true metallic paint. I'm talking about like just seeing a suit of armor. It just won't have that kind of reflective quality to it. So what I'm trying to do here is just tricking the viewer into thinking this is a 3-dimensional, high reflective quality surface. And for the background of the banner, I simply build it in black. So I'll put contrast paint over the top. And then as it's drying, I'll stipple some petroleum gray into those top highlights. I want the main feature of this to be the eye, not the background. Okay, for the base, Administratum Gray is smooshed in there, and then I take a little bit of Japanese uniform before it dries and smoosh it in again. That's up to you if you want to use any weathering powder on the top of this or embellish it anymore, completely up to you. But the client requested simple bases, so a simple base is what he shall have. If you did want more basing guidelines, up on the website, you can find Not Just Tufts. It is a basing tutorial series that's covered snow, industrial, grimdark, Istvan. We have a whole bunch of bases on there already. Blood and Gore. Now, I love using Blood and Gore right at the very end of a project because it adds immediacy, it adds drama, it adds movement. And especially to static models, having this flash of blood streaking across it can give you so much more dynamism. I like painting my miniatures in the middle of battle. I don't like them being static out of the war. We use Tamiya, clear red, and a pinch of black ink, and then we mix it with a little bit of UHU glue. So it's UHU glue, and that thickens up the mixture. And that gives you that thick, stringy appearance to your blood that then you can then lash over your miniature. And the great thing with this mixture is if you overdo it slightly, well, take a knife before it cures and drag it across your miniature. It creates more effective blood and gore effects and tidies up any parts of the model that you aren't quite happy with. We're in the first Reaver. I hope you enjoyed that. It's a surprisingly nice miniature. I mean, I know I always hop on about the good old days of the Horus Heresy and how everything was better back then. But this is one of the later releases that I felt like I underestimated when it first came out. It's chock full of really nice details, from the Chthonian coins, the mirror coins across it, to the Chthonian markings. The dimensions are really nice in the miniature. And it's a weird thing to say, but just the feel of the miniature underneath your brush and airbrush has some really nice dimensions. Yeah, it's just a very satisfying miniature to paint. So I do hope that you give it a go. It's not completely overwhelming. It's a nice introduction to the character series, especially when you want to build up to more complex pieces like Sigismund or Khan. This is a really nice introduction to it. Overall, thumbs up from me with this miniature. Really enjoyable piece. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed that. Hope you're enjoying the new format. I'll catch you in the next vid. I'm leaving that in.